Okay. Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. We are in the second part of our shiur about Rav Yoel Teitelbaum, or Rav Yoelish, the Satmar Rebbe. And I would like to begin with two corrections that I was given by our YouTube listeners that send comments to me. Both are correct. So I would like to correct it also here. One is that I wrongly said last week that Siget is in nowadays Ukraine. That is incorrect. It is back to Romania. Now, I don't know where it would be 50 years from now, but it is in Romania right now. The second correction is that I was wrong in the genealogy of Rabbi Yoelish. I mean, he was five generations family of Rebbes, as I said. However, the first one was not the Ismach Moshe, but it was the Itavlev. The Ismach Moshe was his grandfather. The Itavlev was the grandfather of his grandfather who began the dynasty. So that's the two corrections which I would like to begin with, and thank as I said, our YouTube listeners for these. Okay, so where are we? As we remember, I hope we remember, in 1887, Rebbe Yoelish was born. Rebbe Yoel Teitelbaum was born in Siget, which is nowadays not in Ukraine, but in Romania. And after he was the youngest in the family, so he had an older brother that was supposed to continue his father. However, unfortunately, his older brother died very young, so he replaced him as the son, as you say, as the continue and the heir of the Chassidut of the family, and also was able to grow it very much by himself. And he's sitting not in Siget, he's sitting in Satmar, of course, because he's the Rebbe of Satmar. So obviously became the Rebbe of Satmar after sitting in Satmar and building his Chassidic court there. His personal life were full of difficulties. He was married very young, had three daughters, but unfortunately, in this point of the story, his first wife already passed away, and he remarried but had no children from the second wife, and also two of the three daughters already passed away. Now, I think I already told you that the third daughter would also unfortunately die, leaving him without children, so leaving him very lonely in his older years. So that's from the very personal, his very personal life. As I said, in 1928, he became the Rav of Satmar. In 1936, as I said, his first wife died. In 1937, he marries Altafega. You remember, it's the Polish woman that he married. And in the same year, in Romania, the party called Mishmar, in Hebrew it's called Mishmar Barzel. In English, I think they translate it as the Iron Guard. And the Romanian name, I apologize for not knowing. So they become part of the coalition. For a very short time, they even become the head party, the strongest party in Romania, and they make very bad laws for, as you can imagine, for the Jews. Although they are being overthrown after relatively a short period of time in government, nonetheless, most of the laws that they put into the law book remained. And that was very, very difficult for the Jews. And because the Jews were between themselves, they were segmented, then it became very difficult for them to have some type of a unified front in order to fight those that attack them. And that was the first sign, we may say, first warning of the disastrous nature of the segmentation that the Jews were stricken with in all of Europe, but in Romania and Hungary, I think it was very, very strong, and the difficulties that would create in their ability to stand against their oppressors. Rabbi Yoel himself refuses to join any type of unified effort against again, against the coalition, against the government. He also a part of not wanting to cooperate with people that he deemed not orthodox enough or not having the right opinions. A part of that, he was also worried that it would only make the government more anti. If they would see the Jews demonstrate and try to recruit the public opinion from Chutz La'aretz against the Romanian government, it would only cause the Romanians to act more harshly against the Jews. And that's, I think that's a practical side. You can either take it or leave it. And again, knowing from playing, as they say, the Monday quarterback is very easy, right? When you already know what happened, then you can say, it would have been better to fight as strong as you could because anyhow, the Jews were doomed. But of course, they didn't know that in 1937 or 1938. And basically, that's what Rav Yoel says. He says what we should focus on is tefillah. And even tefillah, we shouldn't do like a day of tefillah against the decrees of the government, because that again would be seen as a provocative step. So we should focus on the tefillah that we already have. That was his opinion. In 1939, as we know, Second World War breaks. And in the beginning, Romania is relatively quiet. 1940, Hitler decides that parts of Transylvania would return to Hungary. Now, again, that's much too complicated for us to go into European politics, especially not of the Second World War. But that's what was decided. Now, in the beginning, the Jews in Transylvania thought that can be a source of hope, because the Hungarian were always looked as more cultured than the Romanian. So they would surely behave to the Jews better than the Romanians. Now, again, it's very easy for us, looking back, knowing the whole thing was an illusion and all of them were barbaric, anti-Semitic, murderers. I don't think that I have to tell stories here. However, that's what they believed, that the Hungarian would be better. So they were in the beginning happy for returning to Hungarian control. However, very, very quickly, they were disillusioned because Hungary was also inscribing anti-Semitic laws, both because of Hitler's pressure on them, but also because they were quite happy doing it themselves. Some of Reb Yoel's own students were captured, and they didn't carry the right passports, the right papers, so they were either deported or murdered on the spot. And that made it very clear to anyone that needed further clarifications what the situation is. And as a difficult situation, there was growing pressure on Rav Yoel that he was heading we may say now, the ultra-Orthodox congregation in all of Transylvania. So they put pressure on him to join with all of his Chassidim and the Chassiduyot that were following him to join against some united front that was under the auspices of the Aguda. Now, the Aguda is the Haredi political party. So he was not asked to join the Mizrahi movement. He was asked to join the Aguda. However, the Aguda, or at least some branches of the Aguda in certain places, were cooperating with the Zionists. So for him, that made the whole organization a treif organization. If some branches are cooperating with the wicked, then Tuma can be transferred by association. And that's why if they associate with the Zionists and I would associate with them, then that would carry these bad influences back to us. That was his position. Now he was told, look, if you are unwilling to join and cooperate with the Aguda, the money that was collected, mostly in the United States, was collected by the Joint, which was joined. But the money was given in Eastern Europe by different organizations, but one of the most important was the Aguda. if you are excommunicating them, they won't allocate money for you. Not necessarily because they are evil or wicked, but just because how can they speak with you if you are unwilling to speak with them? And now they want to help. They want to help your Chassidim, but you have to join. You have to become a member. He was very principled and refused for any proposal or suggestion that there would be any type of contact between him and the Orthodox movement, the ultra-Orthodox movement that he was heading, and any Zionist or any Zionist associated organization. Uh, we can expand because there were many type of proposals that were given to him, and some of them he was even willing to discuss. But in the end, after all of the meetings, we can cut to the chase, as they say, and he just refused any type of association. What he was willing to suggest is that he would just outright pay and buy certificates. So he said, I don't want to have any type of a connection with you on the basis of we are all Jews, so we are working together, but I am willing to buy. We have money, our Chassidim have money, and I'm willing to pay good money for certificates. You'd give me the certificates, and we would give them to the Chassidim, so as many Chassidim as we can would be saved without having to work under the Zionist organization. To that, the Zionists refused. Which, again, I'm not here to judge no side. But you can understand, we speak about 1940, people knew what was the meaning of staying in Europe. Maybe they didn't know, and the gas chambers were not operating already. But it was clear that staying in Europe meant suffering, torture, hunger, and I wouldn't say that they all knew that it is certain death, but they knew that death is an option. And deciding that because he's unwilling to cooperate with them, they wouldn't allocate to him certificates, that's a decision that one can wonder about. One can wonder about, I think, yes. Going to Eretz Israel. Because in 1940, you could still, Romania or Hungary were places from which you can, let's say, live to Switzerland. And for Switzerland, you can travel. But in order to do that, the Swiss didn't want people just coming in. That was part of their policy. So you could come into Switzerland, and just an example, you can come into Switzerland only in case you have already a visa or a certificate that would allow you to continue. So they won't be chas v'cheila burdened with extra Jews. So that's, again, I think that the history of Europe in these years is known. Mhm.
Restricted because the British wouldn't allow.
That's right. So there was only a limited number of certificates, and because the British worked with the Zionist organizations, in the end they were in control of who would get the certificates. So basically, they said, if you are unwilling to cooperate with us, then begesund, then it's up to you.
And also suffer from the same.
Yes, but the Aguda was willing to cooperate, so they were allocated some certificates. Now, one can, again, that's much, much beyond our scope now, but both during the Holocaust, but during the time of war itself, and in the post-war years, there was a much of debate. Was the way of allocating the certificates a fair one? The Zionists argued that their agenda and their goal is to build Eretz Israel as a political state. So if you are willing to cooperate with that and be part of that, then of course we want you in. If you are unwilling, then why should we give our certificates to you? However, the outcome was that if you cooperated, then you were granted life. I mean, in the end, it was not only a question of building Eretz Israel, it was a question of life and death.
It's not like they had so many certificates and just left them leaving. They just had a few.
You're right.
They had to give them to a few lucky people. So when you choose the lucky people, you take the ones that it's not like they said we leave them in our closet and just died.
You're
What was
right.
that?
You are absolutely
There's
right.
very few of them.
But the counter argument was you are not the decisors of life and death, and you should give it, you should allocate that in proportion just to the number of Jews in Europe, not give almost all of them to Zionist organizers and activists and leave all the rest to their fate. So that's I think it's a strong counter argument. Again, I'm not there. I'm not in any position to judge anyone, just to describe what was going on. Uh, what Rav Yoel was able to do, he was doing his best, obviously, in order to help both his Chassidim and others that were coming in. And there were many people that were running to Hungary from the rest of Europe because, again, it was bad there, but it was better than being in Lithuania. So people were running away. And he was doing his best, recruiting money from whoever was willing to give him, he was also involved, it seems, in some type of faking of documents initiation that was going on. So he was also, in some ways, active in that. So he was doing his best. He was doing his best, but he wasn't willing to sacrifice his principles. And that's, again, that's a position you can either appreciate or you can think that it's illusional. And that's, again, and you have to remember what did people know and didn't know in 1941 in Hungary or in 1940. They didn't know much, and even things that they were told, they were unwilling to believe. That's just, again, it's as it's my personal history, my family personal history. I unfortunately know it very well. I can't remember if I told it here, but just as a story, just to demonstrate how people were. As I said, my grandfather lived in Bethlehem, which is near Dej. It's in the area that we are speaking here about. And he was offered in I can't remember the exact date, I have it somewhere, but either in 1941 or even in 1942. So he was suggested by a goy. He was a wealthy man, and he was suggested by a goy that lived nearby, and he was in some trade business with him. So the goy told him, I am willing to hide. I mean, the goy understood that they need to hide. I am willing to hide your younger children. I won't be able to take in the older children. My grandfather had 11 children. So I won't be able to, because it would be discovered, and I am worried. But I am willing to take the younger ones and hide them till the end of the war. That was the offer that he was given. And my grandfather told him, we don't need, Baruch Hashem, we are doing fine. All the young children were murdered in Auschwitz. Now, again, one cannot know what would have happened if, and maybe didn't want to separate from me, not maybe, I'm sure that he didn't want to separate from them. And also giving the young to a goy family who would know what would happen. So I can mean, again, that's it's not up to judge. I just want to demonstrate the measure of just ignorance that they didn't know what is in store. And that is when millions of their brothers are being murdered already. Yes.
But this is, you said before that his principle. His principles, it's good when you're responsible for your own life. But you're responsible for the life of the community. As a teacher, as a, this one, because
what can I say? I mean, I can only present his decisions. He also felt that he's responsible for the principles of the community. He didn't think it's on his own principles. That was the principle. And again, you don't have to be a Chassid of Rav Yoel. If you are unwilling to possess, tomorrow you can join the Zionist organization. He would bless you, but basically it was a free country in that sense, at least. So if you followed him, then you got what you asked for. I described last week, as I said, it's a very sensitive topic for me. My grandmother didn't forget and you may say that she never was able to be moichel throughout all of her life because he didn't give the advices that would have saved my family. So what can I say? What can I say? But I think we can also appreciate that he was principled. And he himself, by the way, it's very important, he was suggested a personal certificate to save himself if he would sign a document in which he retracts his anti-Zionist propaganda. And he refused. He refused. So these are principles that he applied to everyone, which I think is something to appreciate. You can either agree or disagree, but it's something that can be appreciated.
But the problem was, as you pointed out last week, that he himself was able to.
In the end, let's reach that, because the world is going to change, and very unfortunately. 1942, at the second night of Rosh Hashanah of Tafshin Gimel, Hungarian soldiers stormed into the Bet Midrash of Satmar and hit and harmed the mitpalelim. So they cut some of the beards. As we know some of the pictures. Rav Yoel was able to hide. He was able to run away and to hide. Excuse me. In the drasha in the day after, he gave a drasha. Now, how do you? I don't want even to imagine how is it to give a drasha in the morning after such an event. In a way, I see it to his merit that he was willing to stand and speak, and not to remain hiding, maybe saying that it's still dangerous. Meaning that there are ways to evade such an uncomfortable situation. But he didn't do it, and he didn't hide. He stood out. He gave the drasha. In the drasha, he said, "Please don't ask me for miracles," because he was a Rebbe. People came to him asking for miracles. He said, "I cannot work miracles. And the only thing that is left for us is to pray." Again, it's a strong position, but was that the only thing that was that remained for them? There were other actions that could have been taken, and other Rebbes had indeed taken them. And he walked out of principles in which he negated these decisions in 1943. So we are fast forwarding in history, but obviously, as we skip here between the months, things are changing very, very fast, and rumors begin to come in. In 1933, 40 rabbis signed a document. 1943, excuse me, 1943. 40 rabbis signed the documents of agreement in which they say that the Haredi, again, not the Orthodox, anyhow you want to call them, would be joined into the Zionist organization's network, which was working on networks of assistance of smuggling Jews outside of Hungary to the east, of hiding Jews, and Rav Yoel stood against this agreement and was able to cause some of the rabbis that signed it to retract their signature, and in the end, the whole innovation failed, the whole initiation fell through because of his principled unwillingness to work with the Zionists. At that point, he began to fear for his own life because he knows that the anti-Semitics are first going to the heads of the Jews, to the leaders. So he say it may be that for the rest of the Jews, it is still considered safe enough to stay here, but maybe I need to leave because of my position as a leader. And he begins himself to work on getting a certificate. But again, because he's unwilling, it returns to the same circle. He wants a certificate, but he's unwilling to go back, to step back, or to stand down from his positions. And so he is refused. He is refused. His daughter and son-in-law do get a certificate because they do sign a document in which they I didn't see the document, so I don't know exactly what it is, but in some way they declare that they do not necessarily identify with everything that their father says. That's basically what the document says. And after saying that, I don't know, I find it appalling that people were required to sign on this type of documents in order to save their life. But on the other hand, I mean, it's a complicated situation, I think, clearly for all of us. In the 19th of March, 1944, that's a date, again, that those of us that have Hungarian roots maybe would identify. That is the date in which the Germans had entered themselves into Hungary. The Hungarian government began to understand that they are on the losing side of the war. So not because they love Jews too much, but because they understood that when the war would end, they would find themselves being judged by the Allies. So they wanted to switch sides. But information about that reached the Germans, and they just conquered Hungary. That's, again, I'm very, very oversimplifying what happened. So in 19th of March, 1944, the Germans entered into Hungary, and they catch, you may say, they catch the Jews there completely unprepared, especially the Haredi Jews. And more especially the ultra or the Hasidic Jews, because they just didn't prepare themselves. For good reasons, for bad reasons, again, I'm leaving that to anyone's judgment. And especially, we have to remember, we are sitting many, many years later, and we judge it according to the information we have. They didn't have this information. It's also important to remember, but facts are what they are. And the facts are that there were no networks, there was nowhere to hide, and there were no means for opposition that were prepared at time. So they are being caught, and they begin to herd them into the ghettos. It was proposed to Rav Yoel at that stage to run away and hide as a goy. So he'd have to shave his beard and to take off his Chassidic clothes, and he refused. He said, I'm who I am, and if it would be the decreed that I would die as who I am, then I would die as who I am. And he refused to shave off his beard or to change his clothes. However, as things are deteriorating, and again, he's very much worried for his own life. Not Chassidim, he was not worried about his Chassidim. He was. I think I don't even have to say that. But he felt, and for good reasons, that he would be one of the first ones to be identified by the Germans and to be executed. And so he was, and he was besieged by his own Chassidim, or at least some of them. I guess some of them wanted him to stay, but some of them wanted to make sure that the Rebbe is safe. And they were able to, just the night or the day before the Satmar ghetto was sealed off, they were able to, is smuggle the right word?
Smuggle.
Yeah, to smuggle him, and with a car. However, they were Hasidic Jews, they were not Rambo. And they forgot there was a guide. It's a very sad story, but it's somewhat funny. There was a guide who was supposed to guide them, and they just forgot him. They went with the car. They bought a whole special car that he was able to be inside, but they forgot the guide, and they went off. And in the middle of the way, they understood that they were not able to come back because the gate was already sealed, or they were worried they would be caught. So they came to the place where they were supposed to hide, but they couldn't find the hiding place. And there was a police patrol that just caught them trying to find the way. And they were all, of course, in prison because it was understood that they ran away from Satmar. He was sent to a different ghetto, not to Satmar, but to a ghetto named Cluj. And by that, he was disconnected from his Chassidim. And from there on, for understanding the rumors that got to him, his understanding was that his Chassidim were murdered, which was mostly accurate. I mean, almost all of them were murdered. So now, in a way, he is, how would I say that? In a way, he's free from responsibility because his Chassidim, there is nothing that he can do for them. With him. Only wife. The daughter and left, so it's only his wife with him. So he's in Cluj, and again he's very much worried that because he's a very well-known Rebbe, then they would come after him the first. And then there is this train, which is organized by a Zionist activist named Dr. Kastner. And he's organizing a train, he's bribing Eichmann for a very hefty sum to save the numbers fluctuate and different, but it seems that there were about, I hope that I'm correct here, 1,700 Jews that were saved. And Eichmann was willing to accept the bribe and to let the train leave, go through Germany, and end in Switzerland. And they suggest or propose to Rav Yoel to embark the train. Now, the train, as I said, was organized by Dr. Kastner, was a Zionist organizer, and according to the principled opposition that we described earlier, which surely instructed Rav Yoel also in his own personal decision, because as I said, he was unwilling to sign any document in which he is backtracking his positions. However, here he did embark the train. Now, these are the facts. Explanations abound and were given by different people at different times. I don't know of a formal document in which the Rebbe himself explains his reasons for this decision. Maybe there is, and I am unaware of, but I'm, as I said, now, so I'm analyzing it according to what I read and according to what just I think. I do think that, as I mentioned earlier, his assumption was that his Chassidim were already murdered. And also, so there is no reason for him to stay just in order to stay with his Chassidim. He was not with them. That's very important to emphasize because sometimes he's being criticized for abandoning his Chassidim. They were already, I mean, he was not able to be with them. It's very important to understand that. So he's in Cluj, and he has to make the decision. Now, he was, as I said a few times, he was willing to pay for certain, as long as he's not having to join, but only to pay. That was something that he was willing to do. And there on the train, in order to be able to pay the bribe to Eichmann, then some of the money was paid by the ultra-Orthodox organizations of Hungary. So I think he could see he's embarking the train not as a sign, he didn't need to sign anything. So he saw him joining the train not as any nod towards the Zionist organizations, but only he paid for his place, and he's being saved because he maybe is is in the gravest danger because he is a Rav, and also a leader, a Jewish leader, and also because he would be needed after the war. So under these assumptions, he embarked the train. As we can understand, again, many people harbored very hard feelings because his advices and consolations to people were not to leave. Not at this point. At this point, obviously, he told anyone that can escape to escape, but that was much, much, much too late. Much, much too late. And for years, when it was possible to run away, he advised people to stay and that Hashem would take care. And then now again, so what do you want? That he would sacrifice himself because he made a mistake with other people? That's also, I think, I mean, that's not the right position. You can only be silent. Yes, you can only be silent.
Tradition that when the ship sinks, that the captain stays on the ship and goes down with the ship because it was his ship. And So I don't know. The captain of the Titanic also didn't go into the.
Just again, judging from later years, what he was able to do in the United States, I don't know if there was anyone else that was able to do, would have been able to do the same. So would have been better to the Yahadut that he would be murdered in again, not with his Chassidim, because he was not with them anyway, but he would be murdered in clothes just in order for us to feel there is justice and not be able to establish the whole of the Satmar Chassidut as we know it nowadays. I mean, that's, again, it's not for me to decide or to judge.
Well, after the war, well, maybe you will come there, but
Of
he was
course.
aware of what he said and what he did.
He could live with it.
That's my question. How he could live with
Yeah.
it? You know,
That's not a question to me.
No, but maybe there are sources.
That's not a question to me. I would try to explain as we would go forward, but I mean, again, I want to say again something that I expressed also last week. It's with a great trepidation that I'm giving this shiur. I am not in any place to criticize, and I'm not an historian. It is not my I'm not being paid in order to criticize, and especially I'm not in any position to judge people that were obviously much more Talmidei Chachamim and much more tzaddikim than I am, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be inspired by by our rabbis. That's the title of this shiur, and that's what I'm trying to do. On the other hand, I'm not trying to hide anything. I do want to say things as they have been, at least as I understand that they had been, and I'm trying to judge in the most positive light that I can. And that's what I'm doing here. I do think that that's what led him. I mean, I'm not willing to hear that he was just trying to save his own skin. That's I think is wrong. Knowing just the personality and what he did earlier and what he did later, and the personal prices that he was willing to pay for his positions, I think that he was a very principled and a man of principles. So I don't think that he felt that he's sacrificing his principles when he embarked at the train. It's still a decision that everyone here is free to think about and judge. I think that would be fine. And as I think I already told you how my grandmother, who was very close to the events, how she saw that. But it's not for me here on this table. I also think the things that were allowed to my grandmother that spent her time in Auschwitz and in other places is not necessarily allowed to me. So I'm giving the information as I understand it. During the train, so he was on the train took some time. Eichmann, at a certain point, Ahmed stopped the movement of the train and demanded more money. Otherwise, he's giving all the Jews. Again, only silent. Yeah, only silent. Yes. So he demanded more money. And again, it was part of the money was paid by Satmar Chassidim or people that wanted to see the Rebbe being saved. Also, it seems that he was one of the most famous people on this train. So at certain points, when it was already in Switzerland and Jews were coming to welcome them, then there is a testimony given by. There is a book named Beseter Ram by a Haredi historian named Esther Ferbestein. But it's a very well written book and researched. And she has there a testimony from a certain poet, a secular poet that was also on the train that was saved because the Zionists wanted to save Hebrew culture. I don't think that anyone knows his name nowadays. Anyhow, so he was on the train and he was a guest. He was his pride was injured that he is this secular poet, and no one comes to greet him at the train station. They all come to greet this primitive Rebbe with his gridlocks and side locks and Chassidic Reb. So he was very affronted by that. So people wanted to see him safe. It's very important to understand that as well. And it is very famous that during his time in the train, and then he was jailed in Bergen-Belsen before moved to Switzerland. So he refused to shave his beard. He refused to eat anything that was not only kosher, that was a glatt kosher. So he was almost ate nothing. And he did his best to keep, again, what he thought was right to keep. On the 3rd of December 1944. So the whole thing in the end, the Germans entered into Hungary in 19th of March. And in the 3rd of December, he was already in Switzerland. However, in the 3rd of December, most of his Chassidim and most of Hungarian Jewry was, when my grandmother went into Auschwitz in one of the transports, it was the second day of Shavuot. Her parents came in the day before. I think I already mentioned that, again, another story, just understanding the unknowing. So when they were put into some type of a transportation camp between where they lived and being sent to Auschwitz. And they were told that they would be sent for relocation. They would be sent to relocation. And they would only have to work for the Germans. That's what they were told. And they believed. 1944, and they believed the Germans. For me, these are just two facts. And so my great-grandfather was in this temporary camp, and it was very difficult there. It was very harsh. And the 11th of their children was a baby, a few weeks old. So they wanted to come to where they can reside, and not just this temporary place. So he bribed the guards in order to be on the first transport to Auschwitz, which of course he didn't know. That's the amount of unknowing that was there. It's a shocking story. It's completely true. It's completely true. It's documented. My grandmother gave a testimony to the Spielberg project. I remember that very well. They came to Auschwitz at the first day of Shavuot, and my grandmother came. So he went with his wife, meaning with my great-grandmother, and the young children, and the older children waited another day and came in the next transport. So they came on the second day of Shavuot, and when they disembarked the train on the known ramp, right? And some of the people that took off the train, she knew them from Bethlehem. They were there a few weeks before. And she immediately asked them, "Where are my parents?" And he pointed at the smoke. And that's where most of the Chassidim were. I mean, that was in Shavuot, so that in May or June, and we speak about December. So most of Hungarian Jewry was already decimated, was already destroyed at the time. As we know, at 1945, the war ends. And Rav Yoel, during his time in Switzerland, he was trying to save Jewish children, and he was trying to establish a Beit Yetomim, right, an orphanage house for orphans of the war. Again, he faced many difficulties because he was unwilling. It's the same thing for Hungary, nothing changed. He was unwilling to participate with other organizations. And also, he was very strict with the type of education he wants to give the children. So other organizations were unwilling to cooperate. I mean, he was unwilling to cooperate with them. They were unwilling to cooperate with him. So he was able, to save and to help 50 children, which is a large number. Every child, every person, every soul that you can save is the entire world. But in the numbers that we speak here, they're about, it's a drop in the bucket. Again, he did his best according to what he understood he should and must do. No one can blame him for not doing, but he did in the way that he understood was the best. After the end of the war, he decides to go to Eretz Israel and try to reestablish his Chassidut, and maybe to join the Eida Haredit. If you remember, in 1930s, he was trying to be accepted as the head of the Eida Haredit in Yerushalayim. And so in 1945, he comes to Eretz Israel. But again, he's very extreme. He's very harsh. So I quote from one of his drashot in Yerushalayim in 1945. He says, many have asked me and warned me not to speak explicitly against the Zionism, because that's a danger of life. Here in Israel, there are many Zionists. אולם באמת בארץ ישראל, but in truth, here in Eretz Israel, the sins are even greater, because that's the palace of the king. So if I spoke against them in Europe, then of course I should speak against them in Eretz Israel, because their sins are even more glowing here. And if they would continue with this vein, then instead of, it would be maybe the ground would be Eretz Israel, but the holiness would evaporate. There would be no holiness of Eretz Israel. And all the buildings and all the places the Zionists have established and erected here in Eretz Israel are, in the end, would completely be nullified and destroyed. And from all of these buildings, nothing would remain, everything would burn. That's a drasha that he was giving in Yerushalayim. So you can understand what his position was, what his positions were. And you can imagine that it was very difficult to walk in Yerushalayim if that's what you hold to. And also we have to admit there were people that also came to Yerushalayim and bear grudge against him, because as I said, my grandmother was not the only one that was angered by the outcome of his actions in Europe. And so he found it very, very difficult to operate in Eretz Israel. And in the end, he left to the United States. It is unclear. Maybe in the beginning, he only thought that he is leaving in order to recruit money and to return. Maybe he left in order not to return to begin with. But as we know, the bottom line is that he went to the United States and remained there for the rest of his life. Before he left, he had again, according to the legends, he had a very interesting discussion with the Chazon Ish, about whom, if you remember, we spoke. Now, the Chazon Ish was not a Zionist at all, but he held to a very different position. He thought that, and he gave the line of the Aguda, you may say, that we can cooperate with the Zionists, at least to a degree. And he had a very interesting conversion with conversation. Thank you. Conversation with the Chazon Ish. So the Chazon Ish, he argued against the Chazon Ish that in the Rambam it says that if all your neighbors are wicked, then the Rambam says you should run away to the desert in order not to be influenced. The Chazon Ish said, our desert, our midbar, is the koilelim. We would establish koilelim, establish yeshivot, and that way we would close ourselves and be defended from this outside influence. And as you know, that's what the Chazon Ish established here in Eretz Israel. But the Satmar says, no, I'm against koilelim. He was against, by the way, koilelim. He thought that when a person is old enough, mature enough in order to work, he should go to war. If you become a Rav, then that's one thing. But otherwise, you should work. So koilelim is not the right place. So what does it mean to go to the desert? You should literally go to the desert. And that's why he went to the United States, which is not a Sefer desert, but he went and established a whole new city, right? A whole new Kiryah. So he would be completely in control of everything. He would be able to establish walls and gates. So he would be completely in control of what comes in and what goes out. So he's leaving Eretz Israel in 1946 with nothing. Almost no Chassidim, almost no money. He's already almost 60 years old. So he's not a young man anymore. And what he worked for in Europe, completely in ashes. I think many people at that stage would, throw their hands in desperation and so it is what it is. And again, I'm not trying to do any hashvaot, right? Any comparisons here. But if you can remember, we spoke about Rav Weinberg, the Sridei Esh. After the war, he remained in Switzerland. And he was offered positions here and there in Eretz Israel, in the United States, and he refused for different reasons about which we spoke when we spoke about the Sridei Esh, but also because, and he writes that, because he was broken. After the war, he didn't feel that he's able to rebuild. And Rabbi Yoel stood up, cleaned the ashes from his Hasidic clothes, and went on to the United States to establish either the biggest or maybe almost the biggest, that's always this dispute between him and the Chabad, but the biggest, most vibrant, and the strongest Chassidut in the United States. That's something that I think is to be admired. To be admired. This his strong will. So he was of a hard mind, you may say, in many different angles, but that also he was willing himself into continuing. So in 1946, he came to the United States, and he says, when I came to this state, I found some of our own Anshe Shlomeinu, meaning some of the Chassidim, he says, and I knew them well from Europe. And there they were medakdekim kala kechamura. They were very meticulous about every mitzvah. And here, hitrashlu. They were very unscrupulous. What's the word is? Unscrupulous. Yes, so they were light-headed in mitzvot. And even their children, they were not taking care that they would be educated as they should. והוכחתי אותם על פניהם, so I began to advocate. rebuke them. והם השיבו אותי באמתלאות שונות. So they gave me excuses. They says the times have changed. If something I was able to teach you about Rav Yoel to now, then such a line as the times has changed, that is as opposed to his old personality as there can be. Times never change, right? Everything is just as it had been last year, the year before, 100 years before, 1,000 years before, as long as the Mashiach didn't come. Nothing changed, nothing will change. So they tell me times change. And then they told me that the culture here in America is different. So we are not able to do the same things that we have done back then. And when I was able to disprove even that, they told me that they themselves would have willed to return to their old ways from Europe, but their wife doesn't agree. Blame it on the wife. So he rebuked all of that. He rebuked all of that. But it's important, this paragraph, because there is maybe, if there is one major thing that he did change from the way that he was managing himself in Europe, is that the Satmar to this day, they have schools for girls. This is something that in Europe, he was very strongly opposed, because this is innovation, we don't need that. In the Lithuanian world, they were beginning to establish the Beit Yaakov movement. Chafetz Chaim was in favor of that. Sarah Schneer, we know the stories. But the Chassidic world, especially the Hungarian Chassidic world, especially, the Satmar, they were very much opposed. But in America, they accepted that they need to educate the girls, otherwise everything would be in vain. Right? I didn't say that they would give them diplomas. By the way, because he did send his Chassidim, his men Chassidim to work, he didn't need to give the girls education beyond that. It's a very important fact what you said, because in the Lithuanian world, in the yeshivish world, the men study, so the women has to go to work. If the women has to go to work, they need to be educated appropriately. Because he refuted the Kollel system, he was able to keep the education of the girls more conservative, small c. Right? So that's a trade. Again, you can think whatever you want about this trade-off, but that's what he thought. So in 1948, when that must be like that, right? As the Jewish state was established here in Eretz Israel, he was establishing his Chassidic community the same year. He was establishing his Chassidic communities, the Itav Lev, named after the first of his line. And the guiding line is, there is no such a thing as America. There is no such a thing as modernity. We are here, but we are exactly the same as we have been there. Now, again, as I said, there were some minor changes that he deemed unavoidable, but a part of that, everything that can be kept should be kept. So no English, or at least no good English, only bad English. But it was important. I would speak about that. I hope so. Wow, we are very late. It was very important for him that just as Yiddish is broken German, right, in a sense, and the people, the Jews that were speaking Polish were speaking not good Polish. No, the Maskilim were very angry about the Jews' unwillingness and inability to speak fluently in the vernacular of the countries. But he made it into a dogma. We do not mix. So we speak only to be understood, but nothing more than that. So that would be English, that would be Polish, that would be any language. And we live in America in the same way that we lived in Poland or in Romania or in it. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We are giving what we need, and according to the duties, civil duties are to be met to the extent that they do not contradict, of course, Torah laws. And that's it. And that's it. We live here as there was in Hungary. And he proved that this is possible, because before him, people saw America as a different place. You cannot be in America as you have been in Europe, but he proved it to be possible. And that's, to this day, that's extremely important. That saved many, many Jews from completely going out of the way. Now, again, you can agree or disagree with some of his shitot and some of his methods, as you can understand, just judging me as sitting here in Eretz Israel, serving in the army, etc., etc., etc. Obviously, you understand that I do not hold to his principles. But it doesn't block me from being able to appreciate and, again, to be inspired and to learn what can be learned. In 1953, his last daughter, Rosa, unfortunately, passes away without, as I said earlier, without children. And by that, he remains lonely. So I mean, his wife survived him because she was younger than him, but no children. He is appointed as the Av Beidin of the Eda Haredit in Yerushalayim. That's a late consolation. And now that is for two reasons. One is because that he is the most prominent anti-Zionist Rev that there is there. And second, because now in the United States, he was able to establish an empire, also very strong financially. And the people in Mea Shearim, in Yerushalayim, they always lived on the donations from Eastern Europe. But 1953, no donation from Europe for a long time now. He is able to finance them. He is the man that ran away from Yerushalayim, penniless. But now he is the head of an empire in the United States, and he is able to help the foundations, the Mossadot here, but only if you follow my line. No Zionists, no Hebrew, only Yiddish, no secular studies. So if you want my money, then you should follow my decisions. I think that's only fair. 1959, I'm sorry that I have to now skip and run because we are very much out of time. 1959, he publishes the Rav Yoel Moshe, which becomes the Shulchan Aruch, you may say, for the Kanaim, for the anti-Zionist Chassidim. Very influential book. It contains three shiurim, three parts. I'm now, again, very, very much oversimplifying, but you can find, I think, in English also. It's a very well-known book and very well-read book in certain circles. So the first part is against political Jewish endeavors, against politica. The second is against, not against, but proving that there is no mitzvah nowadays to settle in Eretz Israel. The third one, I mean, you may, but there is no inherent mitzvah, at least according to many poskim. And the third is against the use of the modern day Hebrew. And also speaking about the importance of speaking the jargon, speaking in Yiddish. You can see that by that he is going against all the pillars of the Zionist project. Because political Zionism and Eretz Israel and cultural Zionism. So these are the three main pillars of Zionism, and each one of them is being refuted. Now, it's a very long book, it's a longish book. It's not an easy read. It's written, by the way, it's very good written. It's very well written. No, he wrote it in Rabbinic Hebrew. Rabbinic Hebrew is a type of a jargon that is allowed. But as I said, you can find on the internet. Bezat Hashem, I will try to link if you are interested reading about his ideology. 1967. I'm ending. I want to finish. So in 1967, the 6 Days War. Now that's that's a type of a shake to the whole Jewish world, but also to his own worldview. He published another small booklet named Ala Geula Ve'ala Tmura. So on redemption and on exchange, meaning exchanging of redemption. And in it, the most bold claim that I think that he made, and that is that the whole success of the Zionist project, which was manifested by the 6 Days War, is the handwork of the Satan. So not only that it is mistaken, not only that it is heretical, not only that it is asur, if you see them success, that is because of the power of the sitra achra, of the other side, that is empowering them. That's again, I took a booklet of 100 pages and put it into one sentence. You can imagine that I'm, again, very, very much oversimplifying and not doing justice. But that's the basic words. He blames Zionism for the Holocaust. And he says that they are the reason, because by rejecting the galut, by trying to redeem ourselves by our own hands, then there is a pact that Hashem made with us. We would go to exile and we would not be destroyed. If we object the exile, then chas v'cheila, we are under this punishment. So that's his basic position. So he says, you blame me. You are responsible for what happened. Again, I'm just informing you. In 1979, he passed after a few years of illness, in which he was almost he was able to speak, but he was not able to be as a magnet, as a source of energy as he used to be. In 1979, he passes away, and as he has no surviving children, he's being replaced by his nephew, Reb Moshe Teitelbaum, and the rest, as they say, is history, which you can read about the history of the Satmar movement. Thank you. And we would meet Bezat Hashem next week.
Just repeat what you said last week.